Then why is the Biden administration so determined to slap new tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles? Why now and why that much? We're joined by Chris Casquejo from VOA this morning. Welcome back, Chris.
Good to be with you.
U.S. President Joe Biden is reportedly planning to slap major new tariffs on Chinese EVs. Now, where is this huge decision coming from?
Well, China's excess industrial capacity is a top concern for the U.S. and its allies. Specifically, the concern that Beijing is flooding global markets with electric vehicles, solar panels, and other clean energy goods, which threatens U.S. jobs in those industries. U.S. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen said the issue, which threatens producers of similar goods in the U.S., Europe, and Japan, as well as emerging markets such as India and Mexico, was discussed at the spring meetings of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank last month. China exporting its way to full employment is not acceptable to the rest of the world, Yellen told Reuters in an interview in Washington, D.C. during those meetings. U.S. politicians and manufacturers already see Chinese EVs as a serious threat. The Alliance for American Manufacturing says in a paper that government-subsidized Chinese EVs could end up being an extinction-level event for the U.S. auto sector. And earlier this year, Tesla CEO Elon Musk told industry analysts Chinese EVs are so good that without trade barriers being put up by countries, they will pretty much demolish most other car companies in the world.
So it's for the interest of those American firms, but really this can also be seen as an intensified effort by the Biden administration ahead of the presidential election, right?
Yes, that's correct. Tariffs on electric vehicles could quadruple, go up from 25% to 100%. Now, there are currently few Chinese EVs in the U.S., but officials worry that the low-price models could soon start flooding the U.S. market, even with a 25% tariff. Now, Chinese automaker BYD sells a model for around $12,000 in China. U.S.-made EVs can cost 3 to 4 times as much. Now, there's particular concern that China's green energy products will undermine the massive climate-friendly investments made through the Democrats' Inflation Reduction Act that President Biden signed into law in August 2022, and he's made that a hallmark of his campaign on the campaign trail. You know, he's touted that as one of his major legislative achievements.
Well, what former U.S. President Donald Trump is saying that Biden's tariff hike should have happened 4 years ago, which means both Biden and Trump appear to be on the same page about keeping China under control. Chris, what differences are there between the two?
Yes, it's very true that both Biden and Trump want to be seen as tough on China, whereas Biden wants competition with China, not conflict. He's trying to achieve this through an industrial strategy that uses government financial support to attract industry and private investment in new factories and advanced technology, while limiting the sale of computer chips and semiconductors and other equipment to China. Whereas Trump has floated the idea that levying massive tariffs against China will help address the huge trade deficit between the U.S. and China. And he's repeatedly claimed that Biden's support for EVs would ultimately cause American jobs, American factory jobs to go to China. Now, whichever argument plays better with the voters could be key in the November election, especially in the key battleground states like Michigan and Ohio, which have a lot of auto workers.
Definitely. Speaking of the updates on the election, now, in the meantime, recent surveys indicate American voters have deeper trust in Trump over Biden when it comes to handling the economy and carrying out economic policies. Why is that?
Well, in a word, high inflation. I mean, inflation is the major issue for U.S. voters, inflation in the economy. 58% of U.S. voters disapprove of Biden's handling of the economy, which is up from 55% last month. And this is according to the latest monthly Financial Times Michigan Ross poll. Most Americans trust Trump to handle the economy and inflation over Biden. This is according to an ABC News Ipsos poll. 46% trust Trump, whereas 32% trust Biden. 44% trust Trump on inflation, and 30% trust Biden. The economy and inflation are the issues that most Americans say will be the most important for them in determining which candidate they vote for in November. Nearly half of Americans say the economy and inflation are the single most important issues to them.
Definitely. In fact, a bunch of figures that reflect current inflation over in the U.S. will be out this week, including CPI. How are analysts expecting this month?
Well, let's start with the PPI, which is the producer price index, and the measure of inflation at the wholesale level is expected to show the overall PPI ticked up slightly for the month, rising by 0.3% in April after a 0.2% increase in March. Economists and traders expect Wednesday's annual headline CPI rate for April to come in at 3.4%, which would mark the 11th straight month of that rate being above 3%. Inflation traders also see that rate remaining above 3% in May, June, July, and August, suggesting that progress has stalled on controlling this key rate of inflation. But Morgan Stanley wrote in a research note that it believes that inflation's descent begins with this April CPI report that's due this week, and that would be led by easing price pressures in car insurance, rent, and healthcare, which could keep the three Federal Reserve rate decreases on the table. But the Fed has been waiting to see what's been happening with inflation before it starts to decrease interest rates.
Right. All right, Chris, thank you so much for the report today. We appreciate it as always.
Good to be with you again.